podcast. I'm your host, Randy, and today I've got Ari Asulin here in studio to discuss a little Saturnian cosmology and then some. Man, I'm super excited to have you. Thanks for coming on.
Absolutely. Nice to be on here. Thank you. Yeah, we'll just jump right in then.
Yeah,
Do you
it's a
have any
huge topic. So
right?
yeah,
Yeah,
I mean, it,
for the uninitiated, Saturnian cosmology is basically another theory of cosmology out there. The ones that we have already, of course, uniformitarianism, which is a theory that the universe forms very gradually over billions of years. It also involves a big bang at the beginning, and a lot of other things sort of in a bucket of belief that can't be tested or proven, but represents the cosmology that's taught in schools, right? NASA covers it, and a lot of people actually don't realize that uniformitarianism started with the Vatican in the 18th century. It was Swedenborg who basically came up with the whole thing, and since then it's been taught sort of as a secular science. But there is no secular science when it comes to the Big Bang. That is a belief that something created this entire universe. So that's a cosmology we're all familiar with, right? Here's another one: creationism, right? That's cosmology. That the universe was created by God in 6 days and then he rests. A lot of people have trouble swallowing this one because it sort of sounds like a fairy tale. You also have to believe in sort of an omnipotent creator God of the universe that also meddles in human affairs to such a degree that he's willing to kill everyone off and start over, wipe everyone out, start over, flood, start over. And it's just like, okay, that's a cosmology. Maybe that's how we got here. And then Saturnian cosmology represents an alternate to all that, completely different hypothetical that the ancestors were not spinning fairy tales or trying to, buy their way into aristocracy. They were actually just telling the truth. They've written down what they saw happen in the sky on the earth. And this is every indigenous race on the planet. It's not just, the Germans or the French or the Americans, but everyone, including the Africans, saw all these events, because if you're on Earth, then you see them because they're in close proximity to the Earth, and they're sort of they matter a lot. They might affect you. There might be fire coming down, destroying your village. There might be another flood. There might be darkness, and all the crops will stop growing.
Right.
All of these things happen in cataclysmic times, and back then nobody knew what to make of it. And now people pretty much still don't know what to make of it. They still argue over what all of our history means. So,
right, all the different tales from the different pasts of different different ancient cultures, how they do kind of line up. You even have symbolism, cave art drawings that are similar around the world. Things that are supposedly referring to the galactic center and certain constellations, and these things all line up all around the world. So to think that they're going to be like our current system and deny the future, the truth, suggests that maybe they did write down what they were seeing and what they were interacting with. So yeah, definitely.
And so it's really simple. Saturnian cosmology says if we're to assume that all of these testimonies are real, are true, then here is what we think they were seeing. What does Saturnian add to this? Well, it adds in the 90s, they were introducing plasma physics. Everyone is inventing plasma physics. They finally saw it in the universe, reproducing it in the lab for the first time. And this fit in right well with Velikovsky's theories that that all these gods of the past were actually planets in close cataclysm with the Earth. But the first problem to solve is how do planets get close to each other and have cataclysm? We don't observe that today. We don't even observe that in other solar systems right now. So if that was the case, what physics explains it? It's not Newtonian physics, not gravity. We know that would not result in cataclysm. It results in slow and go accretion over billions of years, not sudden, not what they're saying, mountains forming and the sky splitting open, not those kind of things, not by Newtonian physics, and not by relativistic physics either, which was very popular in the mid 20th century, which that was a spin. If you really ask me, relativistic physics does not define anything very well, and sort of says Newtonian isn't correct. We don't know for sure, but here's a bunch of hypothetical equations like E equals mc squared, and we're supposed to sort of derive physics out of that. That's called relativistic physics, and that's the modern physics of today. The one that's sort of underneath that's sort of been operating this whole time behind the scenes is quantum physics. And that, of course, has been around since the 20th century. And quantum physics we explain things completely differently than relativistic or Newtonian. We're not talking about particles anymore. We're talking about waves and energy. And in quantum energy, the quantum state is where if you add a whole bunch of energy in a point, it will flow to another point and create a quantum state between those 2 points. Quantum means happening at the exact same location at the same time.
Right, or it's a spooky action at a distance. Exactly, I think Einstein called it. I mean, come on, let's, for them, and that's just them demonizing energy right out of the gate. Oh, that's just spooky. Right? You got it. Yes, that's exactly. Spooky action, man.
Right. And today you got a lot of quantum physicists basically, slashing at relativistic Newtonian, saying, hey, concepts like non-local, whatever they call it, is not real because quantum physics are the underlying physics of everything. That's what they keep insisting today. They would have, if they would have said that during Einstein's times, then he would have been sort of explained away quickly. And in fact, there's a book that came out during his fame time that was said 100 scientists against Einstein. These 100 scientists wrote this one book saying, here's why he's wrong, and nobody listened to them. So we could clearly see a suppression of science going on here. And this science demonstrates not just like, how do we run cars and stuff, electricity, but how did the universe form? How did the solar system form? All of it ties into a sort of suppressed quantum science that has never made the main stage. So in Saturnian cosmology, everything is electric. We deal with the electric universe, like you said. It's the theory. Electric universe theory goes that all interaction in the universe is electric in nature. That gravity is actually a subset of electromagnetism. That gravity does not pull atoms together. It's actually layers of electromagnetism, which differs, goes negative to positive and back. And what you have are planets that are positively charged on the outside, negatively on the inside, and they're interacting with other positively charged planets in our solar system in a positive sun environment. Essentially, what happens is these planets will build up charge, draw towards each other, and then discharge that energy and draw away from each other over and over. Almost all of the cataclysm since the very first memory, since the Golden Age, can be explained by just this physics alone, this repulsive and attractive electromagnetic physics, the basis of electric universe. So let's start at the beginning. I might as well share a screen here. I got that disabled. If you want to try to enable sharing the screen, then I can do that. Otherwise,
oh yeah, for
I'll
sure.
Just get the timeline here.
There we go.
Right. So a lot of this stuff wasn't very convincing to me until I sort of saw some of these pictures from David Talbot in the 90s. And David Talbot is the guy who basically made a video demonstrating sort of CGI some of these events, how they might have looked. And let's try that share now. Boom, it works. There we go, right here. And so we see these images, right? We got this huge planet in the sky. We also got this 8-star figure, or maybe 6 or 3-star, or a pointed star. And then in front of it, you got this red circle, Mars. And it's like, whoa, when did this ever happen? Why would this happen? And so what this is the collinear configuration of planets. During the Saturnian Golden Age, which is the first memory that we have on this planet, there was such a collinear configuration of planets that basically we were in the middle. If you looked up in the North Pole, you'd see Mars. And behind it, you see Venus, which is plasma, it's not a rock. And Venus takes various shapes, connecting energy between Saturn and Mars. And behind Venus, you see the huge gas giant Saturn with no rings yet. Behind Saturn is actually Jupiter, and you can't see it yet because it's hidden behind Saturn. They're about the same size gas giants. And then behind Jupiter is the sun, which again, you cannot see, but the light from the sun is visible during the daytime and still rotates. And in the nighttime, it basically gets darker. Although during nighttime, you still see the collinear configuration in the sky. It's just that's tilted away from the sun, making it a little bit darker. So let's grab this movie here. This is one that I was putting together. And in the middle of it, I showed the demonstration. Yeah, right here. Come on, YouTube, go for it. Right. I don't think that's gonna get any bigger, but
no, it's fine. But essentially, for the audio listeners, it'll be up on Odyssey. It'll be on Ari's YouTube as well. So you can go take a look over there.
Definitely go to paradigmthreat.net to see this video. Basically, it's the David Talbot video demonstrating what the Saturnian cosmology theory believes happened in the Golden Age. You had this about 700-year period of perfect Golden Age when nothing went wrong. And then towards the end of it, you start to have instability and cataclysm. We just saw in the video is Mars, planet Mars, stretching all the way down to Earth, forming an elongated column of debris, striking the planet Earth, and then hitting it with, fire, debris. What's the word? Brimstone. The kind of
right. So all of the devastations that are spoke about in all these ancient legends and myths are essentially explained by the physics of this concept.
And why does Mars have so much burning rock in it? The brimstone is basically phosphorus. It's because Mars, in its position in the collinear configuration, endured a great deal more energy on it than the Earth did. Earth is much bigger, has a lot of water. Mars is just a big rock, and it got sort of fried during the Golden Age. You can see it today. You can look at Mars, you can see that entire surface of it has scars across. So not from any kind of ancient ocean or anything like that. These are lightning scars that occurred rapidly and over a very long time. So these lightning scars also turned, I might pause the video there. Lightning scars also converted the material of Mars over into its reddish form, sort of through alchemy. Very high energies converted the rock from one to the other and created this phosphorus. And that's where you get the red shape and the burning rock from.
Right.
So
anyway, that's why it's got this oxidized look, because it's like hyper oxidized by the electrical current.
You got it.
Right on.
And so during that Golden Age, it basically had these oscillations. Mars goes back and forth, but then the Golden Age ends cataclysmically. It ends with the entire collinear configuration breaking up. The planets themselves individually got too heavy, too much charge, too much mass, and they start oscillating in instability. They had too much. They weren't going to form a junction of energy anymore, but spiraling energies that formed their own electromagnetic fields per planet, and that essentially caused the breaking up of the collinear configuration. Like this video shows, it sort of happened all at once, big cataclysm, darkness. We saw the sun for the first time, but then Jupiter covered up the sun right away as we got caught in Jupiter's orbit, Jupiter now being the biggest gas giant around, Saturn retreating back to the outer solar system. Now we're past a lot of the old myths, like Saturn called Kronos, and Kronos
eats his children.
Kronos eats his children and then spits all the children out, defeated by its own child Zeus, or the Greek version of Zeus, can't remember right now. And then all the children are freed, right? So that's freeing of all the planets. In mythology is basically the breaking up of the collinear configuration. Now we're in the nonlinear configuration. This is Jupiter-dominated solar system. That's orbit. I should say orbit around Jupiter. That's also together orbiting the sun. This means that we see Venus, Mars, Jupiter in close proximity to the Earth, and all this kind of cataclysm occurring over and over. What we have here is the King Arthur story and many, many others, Moses story, but it's particularly King Arthur because that's where you get the round table. Let me go back in the video a little bit here. You sort of see that after the breaking up of the collinear configuration, the planets start to rotate around each other and around Jupiter. So Jupiter is King Arthur, the biggest, the king on the throne. The throne is made of a corona trail flowing outside of the southern hemisphere of Jupiter at the time. So it looked like a big ball on a throne, a big fiery ball. So that's Moses on the mountain, burning bush, but also King Arthur. And King Arthur didn't sit on the top of the table, right? He sat at a round table. So we have a round configuration where all the planets are equal. We also have Mars and Venus, like I said, which represent Guinevere and Lancelot. Mars was the biggest knight around. No one could ever challenge him because there were no other planets like it around. In our solar system, Mars is the biggest, hottest rock compared to Mercury. We'll get into that later. So King Arthur myth during the Dark Ages, when there was little darkness, when plants wouldn't grow, when people had trouble having kids and giving birth, all kinds of problems like that, and they're looking for sort of a savior. At some point, Jupiter shows up again and sort of stabilizes the solar system. Let me get to that part in the timeline here. Right, so the Golden Age ends violently. We get this huge great deluge. That's when all the planets pass through the outer sheath of Saturn. It's a big L-type brown dwarf. It's full of plasma layers, and the planets pass through one of those plasma layers. The plasma cools into water. It's actually salt water, and crashes into the Earth. We got this huge great deluge. event. It actually occurs 3 times. The first one was the worst one. And this is where we get our oceans. Oceans have salt water, right? We don't know where the salt comes from in our Earth oceans. We have never found a source for it. Like one part of the ocean is very salty or something. No, nothing. But the Earth saltwater oceans do match up perfectly with the saltwater found in Saturn's rings today. Perfect ratio of salt to hydrogen. So, correlations there. So we got the Cronus devouring children. That was Saturn, right? Eating the planets. And Zeus intervenes. The cosmic thunderbolt. We see this all over the place. We see it in Poseidon.
Right. That's the symbol I was thinking of in cave art, where it looks like a man with his arms and legs spread out, and then two orbs, generally 2 orbs underneath his arms, signifying a plasma event. And this is exactly what I mean. If look at the proximity, I don't even know how to. I'm mind blown. The trident, right? You've got your trident. You've got the same symbol popping up.
This symbol is very important because it was the electric discharge between planets would appear in these shapes. And
these right here, these in the middle are the demonstrations of actual plasma events that have been created in labs. Is that correct?
Correct. And comparing the lab ones to the archetype ones in stone in literature.
Wow, they're spot on too. That's amazing.
Right. It's a direct match. I got the planets represented in literature. If you look at the C.S. Lewis, he's all about the planets. Every book represented a planet. And Christianity had a lot to do with monotheism back in the day. Polytheism. Polytheism. Christianity, the roots of Christianity, they were all aware of all the planet gods, and they had a place for each one, and ceremonies and everything. So C.S. Lewis remembers old Christianity the way it was. We also had this pyramid empire around the world. We remember only the Egyptian pyramids. Actually, the Egyptian pyramids are small compared to the other ones found, say, in Iraq, Mesopotamia, in America. And what we have is the pyramids built around the hemisphere, the equatorial, neither hemisphere, the equatorial regions of the Earth, around the desert, hot regions. Why would they build pyramids there? It's actually impossible to build them in the desert. It's just too hot, not enough resources, no water to make concrete. Well, the obvious answer to that is back when they built these pyramids, the Earth wasn't hot yet. It wasn't in its own orbit, didn't have its own electromagnetic fields and seasons. And it was subjected entirely to the nonlinear configuration cataclysmic age. And what I believe happened was they realized during that age, during about 2,000 years of darkness, that the energy that was no longer visible was still available on the Earth. These ley lines of electromagnetic energy crossed at certain regions, and on those regions, if you're a seer, you can actually feel them and see them. It wasn't hard to locate. You can also use instruments. If you built a structure on these regions, you harness that energy. These pyramids clearly harnessed energy from those regions in those times, and they clearly no longer work or function today. So what were these pyramids? What kind of function do you get out of this? And by the way, this is not something that, let me skip ahead here. It's not something that went away. We still have pyramids today, like Rugyong Hotel in North Korea. It's the biggest pyramid on Earth today. It's completely empty.
And it's supposedly it's abandoned.
Yeah, abandoned since
so I mean, that's mind-blowing in itself. But yeah, I see exactly what you're saying. So you've got that Tower of Babel looking spire in Dubai, right? Looks like the Tower of Babel for sure.
No one knows who's in charge of all these places, these people. It's a big mystery. So I'm just saying the pyramidal empire never went away. I believe it's still there very much today. They're trying to reharness those energies. So what do? The pyramids allowed for communication between them. It's very very significant because the energy that hit the center of the pyramids could manifest in different ways. You've built a big iron idol, like a big dog or something head. You go up to another pyramid and you chant in it, and then this dog head in this pyramid appears to speak to the slaves. This in the Egyptian empire was their trick to get the slaves to believe that the priests represent God and that their slavery and all that stuff is part of God's wishes, plan. And if they have any doubts, go into the temple and you'll see that the gods actually speak. The giant idols speak to you. Maybe you hear it in your head, maybe you actually hear it. This is all sound energy tricks. It can still be very much produced today.
I mean, look at us talking to each other right now.
Exactly. Right.
Like if that doesn't convince people that this could have been possible, at another time, I don't know what will. But I mean, it's only taken us 100 years from like the time of just basic electronics to get to where we are today. So to think that that
Seems
may
that
not
way,
have
yeah.
happened in the past, yeah, I mean
Exactly.
that's crazy. It wouldn't have taken that long, really.
Right. So basically, this is a simple trick to get people to believe in gods by simulating gods in temples, energetically. The deep state. Have you defined who the deep state is in your any of your podcasts?
I mean, not too much. I mean, it's just
It's
the
a colloquial
man,
term. It's sort of, yeah, it's sort
you
of
know.
come up lately because everyone's sort of seen them rear their head in world history and in modern times too. And they're like, who are these people? You know, they run all world governments, they run all
The
religion,
they,
money,
yeah,
technology.
the
They,
they
right?
that we all speak of. Yeah,
So,
that's
so yes, you know, they aren't like a different race or anything of humans, and they're here on Earth and other places where we think humans can't live, like inside Earth and inside Mars. But that's not the point. The point is how they wield so much power. So we're looking at this evidence in ancient times that they wielded power by playing God, by using suppressed technology, building these giant pyramids for various functions. They're able to enslave a lot of people. Um, what happened was, well, let's skip the other myths. I'll go to the Exodus. What happened was Pyramidal Empire fell apart. The Exodus happened. The Bible sort of rewrites the story in a very biased way, saying that it's all about the Israelites, an uncertain and not a poorly defined race of people who have no reference in real literature if you really look into it. And I'm born and raised Jewish, so I've been studying this stuff my whole life. And what really happened in the Exodus was that we have an Africa story. All of Africa experienced it. They're all enslaved by this empire. And in 1492 BC, interesting date, right? 1492, the Jupiter in the sky, which was at the time the god Osiris, made up of three parts, fell apart into three parts. The myth goes Osiris was killed by Set and body buried in the Nile or in underworld. This was Jupiter spitting out Venus, which it had consumed for hundreds of years inside it, finally spit out on this date. It streaked across the sky. It was called the Angel of Death. And it proved to the slaves that the priests, A, did not see it coming, had no idea this was going to happen. B, do not know anything about God. They got it all wrong. They thought it was creator of the universe. And actually, we just witnessed it fall apart. And C, that they were obviously emancipated. They were no longer required to follow all those old Babylonian customs like circumcision, taxation, usury, baptism, all of it. They dropped it like a pile of bricks and they exodus from the pyramidal empire. But why is it not remembered that the slaves were anything more than the Israelites? There had to have been more slaves than that in Africa, right? Rather than the people that went to Europe later. The answer is because the Israelites, unfortunately, were the slave masters, not the slaves. And I'm not the first one to say this. Sigmund Freud famously said this in 1920. He said, you know, I looked into it and there's no way that the Israelites were the slaves. They must have been the masters. Their traditions and religion are identical to Egyptian religion. Everything is merged with Egyptian. So many people have said it, and I'm saying it again. The monotheist priests were the ones who left the temples because nobody believed in their God anymore. And yeah, they took their religion to Europe, as many loyal slaves as they could, ancient artifacts like the Ark of the Covenant, which is apparently another teleportation device, something that you can communicate through. And they left the pyramid sort of empty. The slaves of Egypt never actually did exodus from those regions. They stayed there because they're used to working out in the heat, and they continued to maintain those pyramids until modern times, actually, until Napoleon times. And they were black slaves. They're all black in Egypt. It wasn't until after the Napoleonic Wars that they were all moved out of there and replaced by new people. I know several Egyptians who have told me point blank that they know that is the case in their history. The current Egyptians live there, have all come in the 19th century. Let's move up ahead a little bit. Later on, Venus finds its final orbit close to the sun. We all know that's near the sun now. But first it streaked towards the sun in this dramatic fashion. It was remembered as the dragon in Asia. And in a lot of these pictures, you'll see that the dragon is sort of regarding this element that looks like a sun in the sky. It's like, whoa, the dragon stops in its tracks. So what's happening?
No doubt.
Well, it's very simple. Venus went from the state it was in, which was our current orbit with Jupiter. And when I say state, I'm referring to the same thing in atomic states where electrons jump from one level to another. Planets do the same thing. and Venus jumped from that outer state to an inner state, having charged so much energy. Right. And during that moment, when it reached that state, it stopped. It reached that in orbit and just froze. And everyone's like, "Whoa, the dragon is calmed," or the raging goddess, as in Greek and Roman mythology, the raging goddess has been calmed. So anyway, just found its final orbit and it stopped there and formed a circle shape and stays in that orbit till today. One final thing that happens, the final cataclysm, was with planet Mars. As I said earlier, Mars oscillated between Earth and Saturn and Venus in the Golden Age. In the nonlinear configuration, Mars also oscillated between Earth and itself. It sort of went close and far until after, it did this 9 times until finally in the 9th one, it broke away from Earth enough to form its own final orbit. This is regarded many times in many mythologies, but mostly in the Greek mythology of Prometheus. Prometheus, of course, is regarded heavily in, even in modern days, a lot of people refer to Prometheus, the god that gave technology or fire to humans. Yes, right. This actually happened. What originally was the god of technology was Zeus. He's had this thunderbolt, and he would destroy anyone that tried to build a city or anything. He was essentially telling us that he was forbidding us to use this cosmic thunderbolt of the gods. And then Prometheus shows up and provides this technology directly to humans. How does it do this? Inadvertently, by having 9 close encounters with Earth. Every time it hit Earth, it discharged a lot of this energy and then went back out again. That energy hit the Earth in the form of electricity, massive electrical discharges, the kind that are sort of able to vaporize entire cities.
Right, so the kind that would create something like the Grand Canyon.
Exactly, you got it.
Right.
So the humans had no choice but to sort of build structures that could harness this energy. And the way what we have is cathedrals all over the Earth. Cathedrals have the word cathode in them. Cathodes are receiving nodes of energy. If you build a cathedral a certain way, then it will absorb those lightning strikes at the top, at the pyres, at the spears, and those spears will charge up and they'll explode. But inside, you'll be safe. You'll be able to survive the storm. So they understood right away. They built cathedrals all over the Earth to survive the Prometheus event. Wow. And by the end of this event, when Mars left, there would be no more cataclysm. There'd be no more events. So the human race is sort of left with sort of a now what, and the now what was, we just learned all this technology. We just learned everything we need now. We don't need, to worship gods anymore. We don't need to charge money anymore. And what we have is in the first moments of civilization, that year 686 BC and afterwards, this is the dawn of modern civilization. Humans spread all over the Earth. They built all these magnificent cities. Cities in Spain, in France, had electricity back in those days. You see those references also in literature, like Spanish literature does reference that they had electricity in the temples, even though they don't understand how that could be. They don't see any nodes, they don't see any plugs, no batteries. Well, wires and batteries are modern technology. Back then they used water, they used stone, like red brick. All of these substances can also hold energy, and you could send it through the river. You can collect it in red brick from the sun. Today you can do that if you wanted to. Right now, you can build a red brick house, plug 2 nodes on either side of the house, and generate electricity during the day. So they figured all this out a long time ago, like I said, Prometheus event. And for the first 100 years, you basically had a perfect sort of coming out of civilization. What happened after that was you had your first war, the Crusades. And I can skip ahead to that unless you have any other questions about Saturnian cosmology or.
No, man, it's awesome. And again, if there's anyone out there that wants to dig into this a little further, go ahead and go look at paradigmthreat.net. It's all there. I mean, everything is on that site, dude. All of the rabbit holes I thoroughly love going down can be found right there.
Yeah, and if you know of any others, let me know.
Right on.
Let's get to this timeline here. So this is the script I'm writing. I'm gonna make a movie about the MudFlood event. I'll get to that. This is what I believe caused it. After doing all this research, after finding Fomenko's new chronology and all this stuff about the phantom time hypothesis, I basically realized that nobody has explained the MudFlood yet. Nobody knows how it happened. Hypotheses, are all out there, like aliens and so forth. And the truth might be somewhere in the middle, but the truth can be achievable. It can be we can determine why it happened geopolitically. We don't have to guess at hypotheticals like time travel and dimension Mandela effect
Yeah,
stuff.
manipulation and all that. Yeah,
We don't have to
right
go into
on.
those conclusions. We have all the dates and the facts right here. We just need to put it together. So it's a phantom time hypothesis. That's the most interesting one, honestly. I didn't expect to find that. I was going to make a video about the last 2,000 years of human history, and then I realized there isn't 2,000, it's only 1,000. Phantom time hypothesis basically states that historians in the last 5 centuries were in a position to basically falsify the timeline. They did this for geopolitical reasons, to convert people over indigenous tribes, to win wars, to hide their own crimes. Hiding their own crimes was the biggest one, actually. Pushing their crimes centuries into the past made it look like they didn't do it, you know?
Yep. Statute of limitations runs out on things after 1,000 years, right?
The biggest example, exactly. Biggest example.
That makes perfect sense.
Right. About 1,000 years, right? The perfect example is the Crusades. You got this event that's supposed to have happened in your, first century, and they got this crusade revenge in the 11th, the 12th century. It's like, whoa, they waited 1,000 years to do the Crusades. That doesn't make sense. But Fomenko's new chronology, which is based on Russian history, their literature, stuff found in the Kremlin, and the Kremlin turns out to be very important in our history. These guys explain very rationally that when the Romanov family left Russia, when they 1775, the whole empire fell apart, and they left Russia to the Europe and America. They took all that Eastern history with them. They stole it and redacted it and said that didn't happen in the East, didn't happen in Siberia. There is no such place as Tataria, Rus Horde Empire. That all of that happened in Italy, in the Roman Empire, and in places in Europe. And so by falsifying history, they created a series of contradictions. History as it's written today doesn't make any sense. You're telling me that the Roman Empire started in Rome from the Etruscans? Okay, well, how'd they create Latin? That's a huge advanced language that nobody else had any part of. And boom, out of nowhere, this tribe creates Latin and creates an entire world empire. And then within about 400 years, it loses it. In Italy, I don't know. If you look at Italy, take a look at the map, there's no room for an empire. There's no evidence of an empire. There's not that many cities, towns, or castles. The Colosseum seems to be for music and not gladiators. There's no evidence that anyone ever fought and died in those. And Italy has this magnificent capital, Florence, which is completely ignored today by historians and is treated like some kind of crime syndicate. If you watch that movie Hannibal, yeah, bunch of crime.
Right. It's an epic looking place, though. I mean,
epic place. And right next to it, you got Rome, tiny little town with, you got ruins and stuff. But how could Rome be the capital of this world empire and not Florence?
Yeah, they do that so on purpose. They're like, look, you're 20 miles away from where the real action is, and we've taken over the real gem, which is the Vatican, and then with the world wars and everything is set out just to destroy. That way people can't point and go, well, that doesn't make sense. Looking at a building, I'm surprised that there are even cathedrals left standing, but they must have still some residual kind of powerful effect, that maybe on congregations.
Geopolitical, right? A geopolitical.
Right. Yeah, exactly. If you can get people to come into these temples and things, and they have an energetic thing going on that people aren't aware of because you haven't let people know that they are energy. Basically, it's that simple. So, and they walk in and become impressionable and vulnerable.
They can receive visions. They can
or become very spiritually aware for a little bit. And if you don't have that in your regular life, when you're in your square by square apartment, and you go to one of these cathedrals, I mean, you're somehow connected with God, right? Like that's the way you're going to feel on the inside. And so they use this and they flex their religious muscles on the entire world. I mean, you won't find a religion, a really based religion that doesn't have some form of a exotic temple, whether it's a cathedral or a mosque with, I'm sure there was technology involved in that too. But as well as that God vibe, when you walk into these amazing, structures, I think that's definitely been used against us.
Oh, absolutely. So, Florence is a perfect example. It was a small part of a big world empire, whose headquarters was in Russia, not Italy, but in Moscow. And let me break up a couple dependent proofs, just real fast before I go into that history. I still believe that there's humans on Mars because there always was. During the Saturnian Old Golden Age, they basically lived on the North Pole of Mars. Atlantis, it was called, best place to be. And then the configuration fell apart. Mars fell out of the configuration. Atlantis fell into the North Pole and got destroyed. Deep State took it really hard. But there's still humans on there in Mars today. They just live inside the planet where it's, you know, a lot easier to live. You got more vegetation and heat and stuff. I also believe giants definitely roam the earth. Got a lot of literature that points out giants. In America, you got the Smithsonian cover-up. The museum completely destroyed all the burial mounds in this country and set up a bunch of dinosaur museums. Said, oh, these are dinosaur bones. It's complete cover-up of giants.
Right. Yeah, there's no dragons and no giants, guys.
Yeah.
It's what we tell you it is what it is.
So yeah, back to the timeline. So here's a mind effort. That year, the year 6 BCE 670, the last interaction with Mars is the end of cataclysm. After that year, we were able to create a new calendar, a fixed calendar based on 12 months, which would never change because the Earth's orbit would never change again. But before that, the calendar kept jumping into a bit larger and longer years over and over as we jumped into longer orbits. And so this year 670 should actually be the year 0. It should be the year when we stopped using the old calendars and started using the new ones. And it's also the date when the year became static. We could say 1,000 years from CE are actually 1,000 years, but 1,000 years BCE, those are an origin story years. They're variable in size. That's a little bit hard for people to understand. So that's the reason for BCE and CE. It's not any kind of human social event that caused it. It's because of the calendars. And then we got this time, phantom time hypothesis where somebody added 1,000 years. So they're adding it from year 0, right? That 670 date. So once you think about that, what they really did was they added 670 years BCE and added another 1,053 years in CE times. So let me grab that calculator. 670 plus 1.
That's wild. What the perception of time passing, right, even in the mind, like, man, that's 1,000 years of stories people have focused on and histories people have dove into that quite possibly just doesn't even exist. And
right.
Think about the power in that. You know what other way to do it but through these spells and this writing? It's crazy.
Right. So yeah, I do believe that's like 1,700 and so years that never existed that they added because they're in position to do this. Who am I talking about? The Vatican. How could they do this? Because they jealously guarded all of the religious relics, Bibles, any kind of text that dealt with the memories of the old cataclysms. They hid it in the Vatican. They still do it today. If you look up the Vatican's underground bunkers, you'll see that they're like 30 miles long of caverns containing artifacts from all over the world that they basically stole in the last couple hundred years.
Right.
So they're doing it now, yes, and they did in the past, definitely. And they're in a position to add this fake time period into where essentially nothing happens. No human events, no cataclysms, nothing. And how am I so certain about this? Because it appears to me that the very first human event was also the most significant one, the one that could not be forgotten, the one that everyone decided to get involved in one way or another by the end, the one that still permeates today. And that is, of course, the crucifixion. So in Fomenko's new chronology, which is based on Russian literature, it's this totally different secular testimony of the crucifixion. You know, it didn't happen in Italy or Palestine. Sorry, it didn't happen in Palestine. It happened in Istanbul, in Turkey, in the northwest corner on the Bosphorus River, where they got this big castle built. The castle was Tsargrad, the first holy temple of the empire, as Tsargrad is translated. It also was known as Troy in Western literature and Latin literature, and in the Bible, in the Old Testament, it was known as Jerusalem. And that sounds crazy that Jerusalem and Troy might be the same thing, but that's what Fomenko is claiming in new chronology, that right, the Trojan War and the Crusades are basically the same events at the same time. They didn't happen thousands of years apart. They involve the same locations, except for that the location of Jerusalem changed several times. The first location was in Istanbul, and after the Crusades, it was taken by the Rus Horde Empire. They then built their own Jerusalem in the Kremlin. The Kremlin, as it's described before it was burnt by the Napoleonic Wars, was exactly the same design as the Istanbul Jerusalem. It had six gates and 3 partitions inside. That's that basically means with each partition you had 6 gates, so it's 666, and that's where you get that number from. It's the structure of Jerusalem. The first Jerusalem, the very first one, was the one seen in heaven in the Golden Age, up in Saturn. In the North Pole, you saw this 6-sided hexagon shape, this electric discharge. It's still there today. You can look at the North Pole of Saturn today. You'll see a 6-sided hexagon electrical discharge. People don't know how to explain it. It also looks like a black cube in 3D if you look at it. This six-sided figure was considered the first Jerusalem in heaven. In the dawn of civilization, it was rebuilt on Earth as an actual building in Istanbul, like I said, Troy. And when it was conquered, they rebuilt the exact same structure again in the Kremlin. Napoleonic Wars, the Kremlin was destroyed, and all of that history was again stolen and moved to the West. And today, everyone believes that the Jerusalem was actually in Palestine the whole time. So how do we get there? Let me get into that chronology really quickly. The crucifixion story basically was a religious event. The Eastern people of Tartaria, the empire didn't exist yet, were basically a bunch of giants. They're different kinds of people, big, small, hairy. Sometimes they had like bear heads and stuff. Is very different from the West. In the West, a lot of people were the same size, having been the descendants of the Egyptian empire masters, who are all about conformity, making the slaves the same size, everyone looking the same. So Westerners all look the same, the Easterners look different. And in the center, very center, you had the most religious temple in the world, Jerusalem, Troy, and a bunch of rabbis there. They're basically trying to convert everyone over to their monotheistic religion, trying to bring back that old Egyptian empire monotheistic religion in modern times. It's very unpopular. No one wants to do it. It's you guys got to start doing taxes. You got to circumcise your kids. You got
So you're talking about sun god worship then, like the Egypts worshipped Ra or the Aten. Is that the one god in Egypt that was their go-to?
Well, the interesting thing about the sun in mythology was that there were several suns. The first sun being Saturn, biggest and brightest thing in the sky. That went away, and then Jupiter actually was right. And Jupiter actually was a sun for a while, briefly. When it went away, we finally saw the real sun for the first time. And yes, all polytheistic religions for a long time included the sun in as one of the planets. Like I said in that C.S. Lewis, he does include that. Other people don't. For some reason, you don't see it in Roman or Greek mythology. Like Apollo is actually referencing Saturn and not the sun. There's this deception about the sun. Let me pull up something I have here, a letter from Velikovsky. It's actually going to spell this out a lot better than I can. Bear with me.
No worries.
Right. So this is to Dave Talbot.
It's amazing.
Right? So Dave Talbot in 1975 wrote his book saying, maybe there's some truth to this mythology. Maybe the planets were the gods. But then he completely removed the sun. And Velikovsky, Emmanuel Velikovsky, is still alive, writes him and says, why did you do that? That goes a little too far, he says. Why? Because the sun must have factored heavily in mythology. It was the biggest thing for a longest time. How could it be removed? So you can see this modern confusion that the sun has been removed from mythology for some reason and replaced by, let me get to that, by Jesus. All these things attributed to the sun are now attributed to Jesus. We have all these stories, these miracles that Jesus allegedly did, that he walked on water, that he stilled the storm, that he provided food and healed the lepers. And all of these things we know have to do with the sun. We also know that the Jesus story is mostly made up based on imaginary pictures in the zodiac. People chose these imaginary pictures in the sky a long time ago, created these zodiac images, and then placed the Jesus story along each one of them, saying, I moved into February and there's rain and so forth. Moved into April and had sex or something. This is a fake story. They erased the real story and replaced it with a fake zodiac. and merged the character Jesus in with the mythology of the sun, therefore erasing and eliminating the sun from mythology altogether. So I'm jumping a bit ahead there. How do we ever get this Jesus guy to be so important? Why is he so important? That is to me the most important thing.
I definitely know the correspondence between Jesus and the sun. I mean, it's
it's pretty obvious, right?
I prefer to think about it as like the only way you can, instead of realizing that, hey, I've been pitched a lie my entire life, is, well, maybe it's just more complicated and it's fractal, so it could be both. That's kind of where I'm at right now. I'm like, it could be both. Why wouldn't he be a guy and a ball of plasma in the sky? That's cool with me, dude. You know what I mean? No sense to argue.
People accept religion as is. They don't question it. It's like, fine, whatever, dude. Yeah, whatever.
Right.
So yeah, sure. The biggest question to me was, why did this Jesus character matter so much in history? The geopolitical reality of it, not mythology and not superstition. I want to know what really happens. The Russians had a secular testimony of the whole thing, and they said, well, it's not named Jesus. For example, the letter J of the Latin alphabet was not in the Greek Cyrillic alphabet ever, still isn't today. The letter J came much later with the Jesuits who named themselves after their redaction of the stolen history. They said, we're now naming this guy Jesus Christ, but actually in the Russian chronology, his name is Andronicus Christ. Now, what does Christ mean? Well, it just means anointed.
Anointed one, yeah.
Right. And why is anointed? Because his mom gave a virgin birth. Now, it's not unique, but it is very rare. It doesn't happen very often. Now, she was a giant too, big hairy Mary. That's what some books referenced her as. And she was cast out of her tribe because they were scared of this virgin birth. Like, holy crap, what does this mean?
That's crazy, because they always do tend to show Jesus in paintings as a redhead. And anybody that's looked into Tartaria and any of that, you recognize the redhead giants from legends of Native Americans. I mean, so.
And that's what Russian means. Rus means red. Russian means red. Redheads. Yeah, that's the race. Wow. That's who they were.
Yeah, see, we're just told that they're all Irish, right? Like that's kind of the going consensus is, oh, you mean redheads? So they must be Irish or maybe Scottish, but you never hear about it being a Rus.
Yeah, we're told about like Sasquatch and stuff these days, Bigfoot, and we say, those must be in regions or rare, but they actually might represent an entire race of humans that have been sort of pushed into the background by modern civilization, by modern historians, and way too much religion, conformity, and communism. But back to the point, Andronicus Christ, he was just a regular guy who was born in a unique circumstance, driven out of his village, and had to give birth in a stable. Why? Because he went to the Crimea, his mom went to the Crimea, which had more normal people, and none of the inns could fit her in it. That makes a lot more sense than the Latin Bible, which basically says, they're mean to her and threw a pregnant woman out in the streets.
Right.
No sense. So anyway, this giant gave birth to another giant in Crimea. That's where Jesus was born. That's why Russia cares about Crimea so much. And he basically was popular. He was famous. Like, remember that kid, that giant gave birth in our village? The tale spread to Istanbul, and the people in Istanbul welcomed him there, invited him to Jerusalem, and said, we want you to be inducted into our religion. Our new religion is so cool and popular now, and you're gonna learn everything as a rabbi, and you're gonna bring it back to your people and teach them. That was the plan. It was good, nice monotheistic spread plan. The problem, of course, because there's so many people they did this to, and none of them are remembered, was that this particular guy screwed the whole plan up. The first thing that he did wrong was he said, well, we actually do have a religion in the East. It's pretty polytheistic, and it's based on this literature that we wrote down. Here, you guys want to see it? And he totally threatened everything they were setting up in Istanbul with their Western ideologies. They had taxation, they had like overpopulation issues, and they still had slavery. And the Eastern way of life, very eclectic and spread out. It was like Hobbiton, except with giants. It was serene and idyllic, and it was very attractive to the people in Istanbul. Kept hearing these rumors that the East had this vast land, rejected Western religion, and so the bottom line is the Western religion was threatened at its core in Jerusalem, at this very center, at this headquarters, by this one guy who was just citing parables. He's just saying, well, this one guy did this, that guy did that, and here's the result. He was saying, oh, you don't need religion, you don't need organized religion. You don't need priests to represent the will of God because we don't know what that is. We don't even know who gods are anyway. And everything he said was a threat. So Jesus, it wasn't his name yet. Christ was driven out with his family from Jerusalem, as the story goes. The Bible says to Egypt. That's kind of crazy, desert region. In reality, he went back home to the restored empire, and eventually returned to Jerusalem after his proselytization made such a dent that they had no choice but to welcome him back. This is exactly what bad guys do. This is what, if you ever had anyone that really hates you, they'll do the Godfather 2 thing. They'll hold their enemies closer than their friends. And it's just something that we see the deep state doing throughout its history. They want him real close, and they welcomed him even to a Passover in Jerusalem. But famously, we all know he was betrayed in that Passover. He was arrested and brought before the court. What was the charge? I don't believe they ever said that he was the son of God, and certainly in Russian literature, it does not say that either. Now, someone else said that about him, sure. The rabbis were all saying that he seems to think he's the next savior. The rabbis were looking for the next savior, having a list of saviors in the past, going back to Moses. They're just looking for the next one. So, of course, they accused him of it. And when they needed him to be punished, they needed to punish him in such a way that it would it would destroy what he was pushing, his Eastern polytheistic religions, to destroy their nature and say, nope, monotheistic God's in charge. Also to scare the hell out of anyone that would follow him in the future by doing the crucifixion itself, which is a very gruesome display. Yeah. And then finally, they had an eclipse on that date. These guys knew all about the eclipse because they experienced ones 100 years prior, and they had their zodiac, their fixed calendar, and they knew that one was coming up. So they scheduled the crucifixion for that date. They actually had to wait a long time for that because it was out almost to the next Passover of the following year, which happened after the crucifixion. The next Passover happened right after. So it's almost a year later. And this eclipse happened, and they did the crucifixion in that moment. And they said, see, this guy thought he was the son of God, or rather, if you look at what was written on top of Christ on the crucifixion, it says King of the Jews, with the word Rex meaning king, that he claimed to be the king of those rabbis in that region. Actually, the original crucifixion story does not say that he would ever claim to be the son of God either. None of the original versions say that. They only ever said that he claimed to be the king of the Jews, the next savior, and that he got crucified and punished for it. Now, was he killed? See, I don't think so. I think there's a lot of reason to believe that Christ was not killed on the cross. First of all, he was cooperative with the cross. He dragged it all the way over there, and he agreed to do it because it was a punishment, after all, from the people that raised him and taught him everything that he knows. So when the crucifixion was over, you see these paintings of his family bringing him down from the cross. He looks like he's alive to me. Later renditions say that his hands were cut off. No, not in those paintings. Looks pretty intact to me. Definitely alive. And the bigger proof is that we see all these sermons from Christ after the crucifixion in literature, plenty of them. First, you got them in Eastern restored empire, the empire that formed under this event in his name. They basically formed under his teachings. And so he became the first emperor of the restored empire. Andronicus Christ, emperor number 1, also the first of the wise men. The second empire is the second wise man, and so forth. Aside from this, we also have in Japan testimony of Christ having gone there. You can look it up, Tomb of Christ in Japan, still exists today. Some reason the Japanese believe that he was buried there. In America, you have the Mormons who also say Christ was here. He had these sermons in great detail, a bunch of sermons with witnesses and all kinds of detail that it's really hard to make up. Modern churches will say, oh, that's because Jesus was resurrected and came back in second revelation. Okay, fine. I don't believe in superstition. So the real chronicles say that he was still alive, that he went to America and sort of founded Mormonism as we know today. Then he died probably in Japan. That's where I think, because that's the only tomb you'll ever find. And this empire formed in his name, the restored empire. The first thing that this empire did, well, it didn't really form right away. First thing it did was the Crusades. And what are the Crusades? It was a major revenge event against the crucifixion. Only 10 years after the crucifixion of 1885, you basically have the sorry, I said 1185, 1196, you get the First Crusade, which hits Troy. And by 1204, by 8 years later, they actually take and capture Troy. They bring it down. So a couple details here. It took them 20 years to do it. It wasn't a successful campaign at first. You also have this thing called the Children's Crusade. You can look it up. Allegedly happened in 1212, but dates are fuzzy. And the Children's Crusade doesn't make any sense as written. A bunch of children crossed Europe and then got slaughtered or sold into slavery. Horrible story, right? Well, actually, if you consider that these children are giants, it all makes a lot of sense. The First Crusade was a bunch of young giants, young meaning 40 years and younger. Giants live a very long time. And the 40-year-olds and younger, they rallied into a revenge frenzy. It didn't take them very long because the crucifixion was extraordinarily humiliating for giants. They didn't like that the small people did that. And they just ran to Troy and just tried to take it right away. They all got slaughtered and sold into slavery. Why? Because Troy has its 3 ramparts. It's built on a river. It's built in a strategic location. They knew this would happen. These guys did the crucifixion of a giant. We're not playing around. They were actually saying to the giant race, hey, come at us. We're doing this to one of yours, the one you love so much. Come and do something about it. Come and attack us. And so the First Crusade failed. The giants could not breach the walls. Second Crusade failed too. And if you look closely, it only really ever became successful because of the so-called Trojan horse. It's not a real horse or any kind of event that makes any sense in Latin literature, but in Russian literature, again, it wasn't the horse at all. It was a internal conflict in the walls of Troy where the people within disagreed with the leaders and said, we don't want to fight these giants anymore. We agree with the giants actually, and we don't agree with you. It was an internal conflict. It was a sort of a civil war that brought Troy down in the end. And it was a bloodless takedown of First Jerusalem. So this event was what jump-started the Rus Horde Empire. This empire took back the holiest city from Istanbul, from the heathens, and recreated it in Moscow, and then started to spread Christianity throughout Europe. Within about 13th century, throughout the 13th century, they basically spread everywhere except for Africa and parts of America. They hadn't gotten that far yet, but they introduced slash and burn farming, which gave them tons of food. They were able to raise huge armies. They had horse cavalry for the first time, and they had iron. Iron fell to earth from the Prometheus event. They were able to smelt it into weapons. They were unstoppable with these horse cavalries. They could move across vast territories in a very short time. And like I said, with the farming, they could just rebuild those armies quickly too. So 13th century, Rus Horde Empire takes over all of Europe. It's remembered as the Mongol Slavic conquest. By the 14th century, the Rus Horde Empire takes over the world. They get into Africa. They get all the way across America, across the land bridge. There was a land bridge back then. And they start building giant cities, monuments. It's a pretty good remembered time in history because there weren't many wars yet. There was a lot of, there was slavery, there was taxation. Like I said, all of the things that Christ preached against, the Rus Horde Empire went and did anyway, which tells us that the deep state simply moved their headquarters to Moscow and continued all of the things that nobody else was looking at: religion, zodiac calendar maintenance, money maintenance, all that kind of stuff is their empire. And the giants, they weren't clever enough to sort of see this was happening to them. But within 1 century, the deep state headquarters was in the Kremlin. They're spreading all over the planet. So anyway, this continues until the Jesuit expansion in the 16th century, the Reformation. The empire basically has grown too big, has conquered too many people, too many religions, and they're starting to endure a lot of resistance from Western Europe in particular. Stories like Joan of Arc, these real stories. Joan got these visions somehow, no one knows how, these orders to fight a war, and she did it. And it was actually successful against the Rus Horde Empire, later remembered as Britain. But the point is that something weird was happening where people were receiving visions from saints to go to war. So it's a very new kind of development. And the Rus Horde Empire didn't know what to make of it. They sort of had trouble putting the Christians down when it came to their sexual activity. They already did all kinds of orgies and had venereal disease spread throughout the empire. They had to slaughter them all in the first apocalypse. So I think it was 1470 or something. After that, these Westerners were a lot more prude and so forth, but they're still resisting in these abstract ways, like I said, by believing in monotheism, by receiving orders. And the story of Joan of Arc is not unique. This happened all the time. And people in villages were told, hey, if you listen to this invisible influence and betray your village, we'll give you wealth, we'll give you everything you want. These entities were known as the jinn or the genies. And they basically, they exist in literature for a reason. So the Reformation of Western Europe started to spawn as a result of this resistance, and the Inquisition of Eastern Rus Horde Empire was trying to put it down. The Inquisition was necessary. They had no choice, because if they did nothing, the villagers would, on their own, round up these witches and so forth and burn them alive. That's what they were doing all over the place on their own. The Inquisition was actually an attempt to stop death from happening, though it has a very bad reputation these days because those same monotheists during the Inquisition all fled to America. They fled the oppression of the Rus Horde Empire. They still regard it as an evil empire in its day. So going forward, the Jesuits formed out of the Reformation, out of that resistance, and they came up with a plan to take out the Rus Horde Empire, a very devious plan. First part of the plan involved stealing all of their history, all of their locations. Jerusalem was in Palestine. The Jesus story was in Palestine, like I said, in Egypt, and that his name is Jesus, and that we're calling ourselves the Jesuits. This whole Jesuit movement was a complete redaction of Eastern everything, like I said, history, religion, everything. And when they started doing it, they reached all of the vassal states of that old Rus Horde Empire, and they basically claimed those old empirical religions. Egypt is the best example, because Egypt went through this story with Osiris. They witnessed their god split into pieces. They gave up their religions. But the Jesuits come back in the 15th century to Egypt, and they say, hey, Osiris is back, and we represent Osiris, and you are our slaves. All of you black servants of Egypt, you belong to us now. The black slaves of Egypt had no choice but to obey this, because they rebuilt the Sphinx that's recombining of Osiris right there in front of the pyramids. And this sort of symbolized their authority to God. If anyone was to destroy those Sphinx, they would have to risk the angry God coming and smiting them, that kind of thing. So this worked from kind of a backdoor access to their religions, not just Egypt, but everywhere. In America, they tried to convert the Indians into praying Indians, Christianized. In Sri Lanka, they tried to convert the polytheistic Hinduistic religions into Buddhism, which is monotheistic, despite what everyone says, it's monotheistic. Buddha is represented as sort of a creator god and single entity throughout most of the places of the world where Buddhism is taught and education is minimal. It's a sort of a low education religion. So Buddhism, the Jesuits invented. They didn't discover it or anything. That's what historians will tell us, that they discovered Buddhism in Hindustan, but no, they already had a polytheistic religion there. So the Jesuits eventually came up with a plan to conquer the Rus Horde Empire in Moscow, to take it out with technology. And this plan formulated under King Louis. Let me stop sharing because I don't have any more details on that right now. Louis the Eighth started a bunch of colonies, and by the 16th, there was all these colonies in America. Louisiana was the entire west coast of America. It wasn't just this little place, but all of West Coast. And the French were starting to spread all over the world, build cities, Eiffel Towers. They built Eiffel Towers all over the place, not just in France, and use sort of advanced technologies to convince everyone to join their modern civilization. In the Rus Horde Empire, they still had sort of backwards technology, old, they had cannons and weapons like that. But in France, they had the latest stuff. The city of Paris was known as a city of lights, even back in the 17th century. It had electricity. They also had everything else you can possibly imagine. It had airships. My favorite thing to talk about are the airships. You got a lot of old paintings. I should bring those up here. Let me go grab that.
Nice.
Yeah. So airships, we only hear about those in fantasy these days. We don't hear about
pretty much that in the Hindenburg. That was it. That was the trauma event to remove them.
Right. And the pictures loading. Here's all my MudFlood pictures. We'll get to in a second. Loading, loading, loading. I'll keep talking while I'm doing this.
Right on. Yeah. So
yeah, any questions so far?
You know, Louisiana being the whole west side of the United States, that's true. And that's a lot of things that people don't recognize is when that Louisiana Purchase happened, essentially more than a third of the United States currently was bought from, quote unquote, bought from France, right?
No, and this was this is right after Napoleon declared himself emperor and was trying to rule the world. Why would he sell part of his territory? And why during the 1812 battle, when that war included America, you shouldn't have given that territory up? The only reason that they say that they sold Louisiana before the War of 1812 was to make it seem like the French weren't involved in the war here in America. So I'll get to that in a second. Here's that airship. Here's that airship I was talking about. You see in this painting, you got basically this horse cavalry getting on top of this huge boat. But actually, this boat has fans on it, and the boat will go up into the air. Now, these fans aren't strong enough to get this boat into the air, of course. We know that. So how is it possible that they build these flying flotillas? The only way that's possible is if they have some kind of anti-gravity technology. So anti-gravity technology, here's a cool video right here. These are more paintings of French paintings of, mute there. And you can see so they did use like air balloons, of course, but let me get ahead here. Everything's loading slowly today. Yeah, this one right here. This one is clearly too big to be an air balloon.
Go ahead and share.
Oh, am I not sharing?
No.
Sorry.
No worries. You know what I have always thought about the paintings of airships, right, with propellers, is that those propellers and things are representative of a technology we're just not allowed to know about. Like in Vimanas, right? You see these giant buildings with propellers just like those. And I think that a lot of that was representative of possibly a different technology that we're just not.
Exactly. Yeah. Sorry, I was trying to show this photo here. Yeah, this is too big to be a boat, too big to be an airship that works just on fans alone, but not
right.
if they have anti-gravity.
If you had mercury vortex engines in those columns, that might be a little bit more functional than some fans.
Yeah, and I believe that this technology is actually a lot simpler than we think it is. Like in fantasy, you hear a lot about floating stones. It's possible to make stones float by charging.
Yeah, with sound or with sound is another one. So yeah, there's ways we're just not allowed to know about them, and it's unfortunate. I mean, yeah, the airships are absolutely amazing, man. And the amount of etchings and detail that is put into some of these paintings or these etchings is insane. It definitely suggests a camera obscura at least, to be able to etch these in such detail.
Yep.
And yeah, so amazing stuff.
So yeah, here, that's what I was looking for. This is a weird photo, right? This is a giant wooden something in the sky that's also burning. It's on fire and it's in the sky and it's falling. So what the heck is that? These are weird events that we're seeing in the 19th century. And the problem is that all of these events have been scattered on weird dates. There's a tremendous amount of earthquakes and floods and rivers changing and just stuff that nobody has seen before happening in the 19th century. But they say it all happened throughout the century rather than at the early part of the century all at once. So let me get into the MudFlood. What was happening with the Jesuits? Essentially, the line of Louis. The plan was to eventually attack the Kremlin, and let me grab that right here, and to use high technology to do it. This was not going to be a difficult war. Right. It's going to be an ideological war. They had to go there and conquer over the people, not just take out their military. If they weren't able to conquer the people and the religion and everything, then they were just going to have to do this later again. So this was a geopolitical event. The Jesuits, who have a military order, you can look them up. The Jesuits military order was planning to use advanced technology to sort of just land their army in the Kremlin and just seize it, take it over. And and this plan would have worked if not for the French Revolution. French Revolution is a very significant event because the center of the empire, France, had lost control of its own government. The government lost control of the people, and the people no longer respect its authority. So which government did France have in the Jesuit Empire? A religious one, obviously. And the rulers were all religious people. They were not elected officials. You had to go to churches if you wanted anything. And and the people basically had it. By 1790, they said, "That's it. We're done with your government. Do something else." They gave the French people gave the aristocrats a couple of years to reorganize their government, and they did, allowing for a vote. They wanted a vote of the people, and so the aristocrats did that, but they had sort of a backdoor plan to dilute the vote immediately when they created it. The first republic this earth has seen since the restored empire in France, and they have this backup plan that's screwed up right away. So what's the backup plan? As the French people get a vote, the immigration from anywhere in the world to France is also legalized. Where were there immigrants? There's a huge amount of immigrants coming from America and from Egypt. In America, in 1775, restored empire breaks apart. America colonies declare independence, 1776, but fail to abolish slavery. Oops. That's why everyone says that the Declaration of Independence is so messed up, because it sort of preserves slavery as it was. And so the slaves who would become slaves on that region, they scattered, they got out of there. They went to France. And there's this huge immigration into France as all the slaves became de facto free just by entering the border. The aristocracy knew that this would happen the moment they legalized the vote, and the French people watched as their vote got diluted by a massive immigrant swarm. We're seeing the exact same thing happen today, right? History repeats. So the French people had it again, and they said, "That's it. We're never going to trust you people again." They dragged a lot of the aristocracy out of their houses and guillotined them. They guillotined hundreds of people. I don't think that the Reign of Terror, as it's called, necessarily represented the French Revolution very well. It represented a small faction of extremists who ruined everything for the revolutionists. And many of the good people in the revolution were guillotined along with the bad ones. You read all about this in Dickens' Tale of Two Cities. It was not a good time. Best time, worst time, right? So after the French Revolution, which ended in just this huge stalemate, there was this big vacuum of power. The aristocracy was not respected anymore. They couldn't establish government. And within a couple of years, Napoleon, the hero of the French Revolution, decided to declare himself emperor to seize that power vacuum. This was not something he decided to do because he's some egoist. Everyone around him was begging him to do it. They had to do something, or someone else would fill the vacuum. Who was the someone else? Well, Tsar Alexander of Russia, for example, in 1801 declared himself emperor of all of Europe. So right there you have this challenge, and the French people didn't want this Russian Tsar to take their land. So they asked Napoleon to be Tsar too, and he did. The only thing to understand here is that a Tsar is a religious ordinance. You can't just declare yourself that. You have to have the church on your side, the whole church. And he didn't really have the church on his side, but by declaring that, he sort of forced them on his side. The French church, which was different from the Protestants and the Catholics, they basically said, "Okay, fine, we'll ordain you as a holy emperor of Europe." What Napoleon was doing was he was turning the plan on itself, the Jesuit plan. He saw exactly what was going on. He was part of it. He was born and raised in their deep state garden. He was one of those people that was supposed to preside over all this. But having seen so many French people go down, he basically, and people around him, said, "We're going to do things differently. We're disconnecting from that Catholic Church completely, starting our own church, our own calendar, our own everything." They started the year over in year zero again, if you can believe it. They renamed all the months based on French seasons. What does France look like on that season? And name the month after it. Very beautiful. This French calendar lasted 18 years or something until Napoleonic Wars were over. The French Republic calendar, I recommend you look it up. It's really amazing.
Wow.
So what he was doing was a very religious geopolitical event, unifying all world religion against the religions that the deep state had created, the ones that the restored empire had created a long time ago, the ones that the Jesuit expansion were recently creating. All of it were being turned on itself. Napoleon visited every one of these regions. He went to Egypt. Everyone knows he went to Egypt, and he freed the slaves, in my opinion. They don't say that in history, but he freed them. He said, "You guys don't have to listen to those Jesuits anymore. We're going to destroy that Sphinx." Now, they didn't really destroy the Sphinx entirely, but they did knock the nose off. Nose is Venus, and the beard is Mars. And they knocked the nose and the beard off deliberately. And the Egyptian slaves saw this happen. They said, "Wow, you destroyed the face of God. It restored Osiris to its parts," as the myth ended. Obviously, no God is appearing to smite you down right now. So Napoleon, you clearly, you're the man. You freed us. That's how I see it. And so he did this everywhere. He went and freed people in Sri Lanka, and he went to America. He made peace with the American natives, which is like impossible to do. Big American native tribe, these huge red, well, I say huge compared to us, red skins. Well, they are today. Later on, they had features of their face and body which made them look like they're a very brave race, very powerful and hard to conquer and hard to fool. And Napoleon somehow won their allegiance, and he was able to cross their territory from Louisiana into the British territory. British was claiming that restored empire's memory, and destroy the White House in the Battle of 1812, in the War of 1812. Historians say, no, the British destroyed the White House. Yeah, no, they didn't. Why would they destroy one of their own churches? That was something they built. They needed it for to control the colonists. They would not have done that. The army who destroyed the White House here in America was the Napoleonic army. And the same army destroyed the Kremlin in Moscow. Historians, again, disagree. Historians say that Tsar Alexander destroyed the Moscow Kremlin to prevent the Napoleon's troops from reaching it and claiming it. Again, why would the Tsar destroy one of his holiest? No, why would he destroy the holiest temple in their entire empire? Doesn't make sense. So what does make sense is Napoleon army destroyed every church they could find. How do I know Napoleon's army hates churches? Because you look at the French Revolution, they tried to burn as many churches as they could find there too. And the aristocracy with their private security forces, which they had, protected all of those Gothic churches from being burnt. And look this up. The Gothic churches were saved back then. So yeah, I know the Napoleon army was an atheistic army. It was very anti-religious, no longer believed in God being the force of events in history, and they wanted to prove it by destroying all these churches and freeing everybody. But this whole history I just told you has not made it into modern history at all. It's what I just said is completely different from
the story of Napoleon is completely flipped around, as if he's a part of the deep state or a part of the plan to institute control and
right.
What you're saying does kind of make more sense than
right. So let's look at the official
them going
story.
Around destroying their own buildings and stuff.
Right, exactly. So let's look at the official story. What did they say really happened in 1812? The modern historians, they say, well, Napoleon lost over 600,000 troops trying to invade Russia. So let's look at this map here. They lost 300,000 just trying to reach Moscow, just by desertion and starvation alone. They only encountered one army fight. There was only one battle, Borodino. Only 30,000 people died in that battle, and everyone else was lost to starvation and desertion. It's just hard to imagine how such a well-provisioned army, I'm not including their technology or anything like that. All I'm saying is provisioning. Armies know how to move, they know how to feed people, they know how to take resources locally. And these guys, if they didn't have airships, then they crossed the Alps. These French soldiers crossed the Alps to get into Russia. They are rugged soldiers. They could not have possibly have been defeated by starvation and desertion. But that's the story, that he totally failed in Russia. He couldn't do it. He never encountered the Russian army. Those guys fled to Siberia. So you'd think that would mean victory. It's exactly how Alexander conquered Mesopotamia, by the other army fleeing. So these wars don't make sense. Also, if you look at the map, you can see that the whole world was split in 1812 between the East and West, that France and Spain were allied back then. And Portugal, though, was part of the West because they had all those original ports of the empire. This was definitely a world war. It should be considered World War I.
Yeah.
Some people say
too.
Right. Some people say World War Zero, just to sort of fit in there.
Right. It was it was everywhere. And all these little wars they tell us about in the Americas with, sub names are just part of that same struggle, it's just mind blowing how everything's flipped around,
right.
And you don't have to be a truther to see that in the world anymore. It's gotten so out of hand that you can see, all you have to do is turn on the TV and you will get your contradictions for the day. So
absolutely. It is all around us these days. So yeah, how much time do you have still? It's not over in 5 minutes, is it?
No, we're good.
Okay, just a couple more things to cover here.
That's awesome, man. I appreciate it.
Yeah, you bet. This is always fun to do. The maps,
I love it.
Maps of the 18th century are very interesting because they differ from the maps of the 19th century. Now, how could that be? Wow, did the Earth change? No. And of course, we find a lot of maps from the 17th and 16th that do match up with the modern world map. So there, contradictions where modern historians will say, oh, these are errors maps and these other ones are legit. Okay,
right.
I don't believe that the ancients or older empires got this stuff wrong. I think they're just as articulate as we are today. They know what rivers and mountains are, and they place them correctly. So let's look at some of these maps. In India, you have something that looks totally different from modern day India, right? In modern day India, you have the Himalayan mountains, huge stretch of mountains at the south side of the Tibetan Peninsula. But for some reason, there is no Himalayan mountains in the old India maps or in the Tatarian maps released by Russia in the last 20 years. So where is Tibet? Where is the Himalayas? Well, how about the rivers? Let's go to the rivers. You got this huge water source here. You got parallel rivers running down to the ocean. They're all called Ganjam. All these rivers are related to the Ganges water tributary. You got this one river here that goes to the sea down there. That's fine. Let's look at the modern map. In the modern map, actually I have a river map here. Where is it? Yes. In the modern map, you see that there are no longer parallel rivers in the north. Everything is now parallel to the horizon, to the equator, and the Ganges is now this huge river that comes out of the western side and drags all the way to the east side into a delta. So I'll go back to that other map real quick, and we'll see that the rivers were indeed parallel. Those parallel maps are missing, and they're replaced now by this Himalayan region. So this is one big change. Another big change over in America, you have California, the island of California. I'm sure you've seen this, right? This one's just famous.
Yeah, absolutely.
How did they do this? Who could have screwed up so badly to actually
I don't think it was a mistake at all, because
right.
if you've been to the Central Valley in California, and then right on the other side of those small mountains that are there now, you see how much just sedimentary sand is there. Dirt, just plain, very finely ground dirt, and just as if it was just like this. Yeah, it's brutal, man.
Yeah.
And I don't think that they would have gone so far as to make this mistake.
Yeah, right.
You know what I mean, on a map.
Exactly. And it's a lot of mistakes here, right? There's little islands between the islands of California. They're all named. You got San Francisco here in the coast, not on the edge, but inland. Just it goes on. So it's supposed to be a Spanish map, and the Spanish people are supposed to have made mistakes because Cortez wasn't able to conquer this area or something like that. That's the official explanation. Let's forget about the map and look at the rivers. The biggest river, of course, the Rio Grande, and goes to the Mexican Gulf. But today we see that the Rio Grande has dried up. It's mostly dried up. It's not as big as it used to be. And you got this new river called the Colorado River, which takes the entire water tributary and brings it all the way to the Baja coast. Right. So this Rio Grande River, it's still a river. You can still see it there today, but let's go back to that old one. It was called Rio Grande because it was huge and it was supposed to take that tributary. Now, where is Colorado? We see some mountains over here, but we don't see the Colorado River. We also don't see the Grand Canyon. And that is, of course, the biggest mistake of all. How could these explorers have missed the Grand Canyon? It's kind of impossible to miss. It's huge.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm with you on that.
Let's take a look at that Grand Canyon. Where do we go here? Grand Canyon, like scars.
I mean, you got the Grand Canyon, you have Bryce Canyon in Utah, which is another massive canyon kind of complex. And they all, and I don't know, you don't have to be into, conspiracies to look at, an electrical scar, right? Created, like, there's some people out there that make coffee tables and they electrically scar the wood. So if you've seen that, and then you see our maps today with the rivers flowing, they look exactly the same as an electrical scar. And it's just on these old maps, it doesn't look like that's the case. It looks like they are, like you're saying, running parallel to each other. There's definitely a method to the madness, it seemed, back in the day.
Yep. I like to focus on rivers because I think rivers give us sort of a slow guarantee of what the land used to be like. And there's certain things that rivers can never do, like cross. We got crisscrossing river marks in the Grand Canyon, which have to be explained. I posed this question on the Reddit thread for Electric Universe. And I got a lot of people challenging me, saying, "Oh, we know what they are. They're fault lines." And I said, "Well, I'll find them." And then they found me the right fault lines. And like, okay, fine. They're definitely marked as fault lines. I agree with you there. But the problem is that where these, you can see how there's a crisscross here, where these fault lines are supposed to have influenced the river. Now, as I was saying, a river can never crisscross. If you have an existing river hit by a new one, they just join. They never crisscross. So a fault line could possibly be the explanation if we can identify which kind of fault line it is and how that would create a river. First of all, the only type of fault line that can even create this sort of create something in the ground that you can see is a thrust fault. The other ones are more or less hidden. And a thrust fault pushes one part of the ground up above the other part. That is not going to cause a river carving. It's going to cause a junction. What we're seeing here is what looks like it was carved by water, but that it crisscrossed the Colorado River. So it's kind of hard to explain, but I'm trying to get to it.
No worries. It looks like a valley. If you're to the untrained eye, if you're looking at this, you say, "Oh, it's a valley."
So the only hole in this theory about the crisscrossing is that potentially it could have been a type of fault line that maybe isn't identified too well or something. So I looked at the fault lines of the Grand Canyon, and what I discovered was that every single artifact along the entire canyon is marked as a fault line. They're all marked as faults, and they're named as the famous fault trail that you can hike and so forth. They all apparently geologists definitely agreed a long time ago that these are all a series of fault lines. But the first question is, why are the fault lines all in different directions? Why are they not parallel? Why are they in an area that didn't have any earthquakes?
Why are there so many of them?
I'm sorry, not earthquakes. I mean, I'm sorry, tectonic thrust. This region doesn't have tectonic thrust, doesn't have subduction, doesn't have volcanoes. So what kind of fault are we really talking about that could have created something that looks exactly like a river? And finally, why doesn't those fault lines exist throughout the rest of the canyon? We should be seeing them everywhere, not just in certain regions. So these are the questions I pose to anyone that might challenge that those are really just explained by fault lines. And now to get to the conclusion, what we think it is a lightning scar. This isn't my theory. This is the theory from the electric universe. These guys have done a lot of research in the Utah areas. They've been to these regions. They've looked at the rocks and they said, how do we explain these rocks? Looks like a bunch of melted mushrooms in this one here in Utah. Could this have been from a volcano, from an earthquake, from erosion, from wind?
Right.
And they said, quite frankly, no, none of those things could possibly explain these regions. What does explain them is electric scarring. On Mars, where electric universe theory focuses heavily for signs of electric scarring, they look for dendritic patterns. Dendritic means that you see dendrils spreading out, sort of filling out an area in even fashion. We see this in electricity, in repeating patterns, also electric scars reproduced in the lab. And the electric universe guys have pointed out that the scars on Mars are actual dendritic patterns. They're not just random water and wind erosion, but they're matching up with the peaks and valleys that are natural in an electric discharge. So if they're saying Utah was created that way, if they're saying that these monuments and so forth could not have formed by volcanoes or anything like that, they have to have been formed by a massive energetic event that melted the rocks, shaped them, and then fused them in place. And as they dried, they cracked. and creating these sort of like patterns that could not have been formed by sedimentary layers or thrust faults or any of those other usual explanations. Here's a mountain in Australia. It's totally melted, this mountain. No one can explain exactly how this was formed. You got all kinds of patterns in geology, which are weird. It's like a bomb exploded under the earth or something. You got
right. Yeah. How do you explain that? It's
painted
unless
mountains.
and then you got the melting, the melted buildings, mountains guys that are all about that, saying, "Yep, there's your," and that to me. And I was talking to a couple of people. When you look at the Rainbow Mountains, like this one that you've got pulled up, it just screams mining. If you've seen these waste piles of like mining slag behind certain types of mines, it's very, very reminiscent of this.
Yeah, dig deep enough, you get to all these ores, but some of these ores are present on the surface. It's like, how'd they get there? Is it just billions of years of shifting sediment, or is it an alchemic change from an electric discharge. Alchemy meaning enough energy goes into the atom, the molecule changes the atom into another atom, from iron to another type of iron, that kind of thing. Here's a dendritic patterns caught in glass. So just so you know what I mean by that. So yeah, electric universe people basically point out like, fabulous patterns that you can see in rock could not have formed any other way. So the last question is, when did it happen? They believe it happened in primordial times a long time ago, but due to these shifting maps, we have to assume that maybe something happened in the 19th century. If it's true that we had all kinds of advanced technology back then maybe it's possible that the advanced technology was used in the Napoleonic Wars to not just change the verdict of the wars, the outcome, but to reverse them completely to such a degree that the people, the survivors of this event, would have no choice but to believe that Napoleon was wrong, that when he was defying God and destroying the Sphinx and so forth, that it was just a matter of time before God would eventually show up and smite him, like I've been saying. And so it's not hard to believe that this happened in the Napoleonic Wars, because we have testimony from the 19th century from the Tsar, basically admitting that it was a divine intervention, and then trying to downplay it, saying it's more important that you respect, us as your leaders and not the church. Otherwise, the Tsar saw that this event's going to happen again. We got paintings like this that basically show mud rains and mud floods, and a bunch of people praying and freaking out and saying, what's going on? What are we doing? And you got a priest basically explaining it to him, like, well, what do you think's happening? I told you guys that God's mad at you. I've been telling you that for decades. And he finally shows up and is destroying everything. It's not a surprise to the priests, of course, because that's what they believed. But to everyone else, they basically had no choice to accept it. In the 19th century, you have this huge rebirth of monotheistic religion. Everyone's convinced that there is a creator God influencing human events, and that we basically have to go to church and pray, or else they'll get mad at us. We also see the formation of cargo cults in the 19th century. These are people that developed weird traditions, looking up at the sky and praying and waiting for something to happen. It's like, what are they waiting for? Well, a drop, some kind of supply drop. And cargo cults,
right. They've never seen anything like that before.
Right. In World War II, we have actual cargo cults in the Pacific Islands. Receiving supply
where they
drops.
Do dances and rituals, wearing wings like an aircraft.
Exactly, it's crazy.
It's wild.
And so it's very easy to believe that this stuff happened in the past. I actually have that video here.
On a massive scale, absolutely.
Let me see if I have that one. Actually, this really cool video of dancing. That's about the sound weapon. No. Anyway, so yeah, cargo cults happened in the past. It's very likely that they could have happened in the further past, in the 19th century. And so what do I think happened? Well, Napoleon's army was defeated. His advanced army definitely defeated, and his ships were destroyed in the sky and fell to the ground. Why do I know this? I don't know this. This is my assumption. It had to have happened. If you had airships, they all had to have been destroyed by something. Something shot them out of the sky. We have this interesting term, French fries. Not really sure what that came from. Not France, nope, because they don't make potatoes over there. It's mostly like an Irish thing.
Right.
And you also have this phobia about French fries, like we should rename them. We got to rename them. No, it's a derogatory term for when
kind of like tartar sauce, I'm guessing.
Exactly. The Tartars were the Eastern weirdos, the weird tartar sauce. It turned out to be a derogatory term, so they named plaque after it, tartar in your mouth and
right.
That's just what happens to words, right? So French fry, I believe is direct correlation between.
It's a jab at them, huh? Yeah, for sure.
It's about
how it makes sense. I've always wondered that, man. I'm like, because you can ask any person who understands France, and they will tell you they do not serve French fry. They have chips over there.
Exactly.
What's going on there?
Right. I know. There's got to be a reason for it. So another word, faggot. That's a derogatory word, and nobody likes that word, but nobody knows where it came from. It basically means flamboyant person. Well, we know the French were definitely that. Their army was definitely that. They're very decorated and pretty outfits and stuff. They're also, they had a beautiful language, and the Jesuits converted people over, indigenous people from other regions, pretty much based on their looks and appearances alone. These small, white, beautiful looking people with a beautiful language, trying to win over the tribes. So that word faggot basically seems to have it also be connected to this Napoleonic War as a result of these ships, these airships being called faggots. That's apparently what they were called. They're big wooden flotillas in the sky. The simplest term for a big wooden structure in the sky was faggot. When they went down in flames, the term faggot achieved another attribute, flaming. Everyone started saying flaming faggot. And they assumed that meant a person that's really, flamboyant and so forth, and sort of putting everyone else off. But actually, we got this reference here in the Planet Wars. These airships might have gone down in flames. These faggots might have gone down in flames. And then we have a modern book, Lord of the Rings, very well known and mass produced, that had the word faggot in it. I was actually surprised when I read that book a long time ago. It was a totally irrelevant scene. Gandalf throws a pile of faggots into the fire. Okay, why did he do that? It wasn't relevant. Go find that part in the book. You'll see there's no reason for Tolkien to put that word in that book. But him, just like Shakespeare, coined a great deal of words and reappropriated them. And in that moment in Lord of the Rings, now faggot means a pile of sticks that you throw into a fire. When in the century before that, it clearly meant something else. So these words have a history.
Right.
So anyway,
right on, man.
So let's get back to what could have happened. Napoleon was defeated for sure. We have these crazy paintings of the event, the MudFlood event, where mud fell from the sky throughout Europe, America, many regions, and that it was a reddish mud. It was actually the color red usually. In this painting, you have this is supposed to be of a comet in the 17th century. Again, dates are fuzzy and can easily be changed or added. This event, which a lot of people associate with the MudFlood event because it depicts a mudflood, shows the comet in the sky crossing over and causing cataclysm. Actually, it shows two comets, doesn't it? Not just one.
Right,
and,
right.
And, they don't really look like comets, even though they have a tail. Honestly, they look a little bit like a giant laser hitting the outer atmosphere.
That's exactly what I was saying. And they seem to be striking something here, like or knock the top off of this castle here. And
absolutely, this is a laser hitting the outer atmosphere of the Earth. You can see the star shape explosion occurring at the atmosphere level, but then a precision energy is still released below it, which can target something on the ground. It sort of forms like a dreidel shape, a pinpoint, and it can carve out castles, mountains. The entire Bering Strait, I believe, was taken out. All of those Pacific islands, which today look like empty circles. I forget the name of an island that has empty circle in the middle of water,
like a K or
yeah, something like that, a bay or something. And it's a type of island that cannot support life anymore because the trees can't grow in it. These islands all look to be carved out. I should just pull it up. I'm not gonna do that.
Yeah, no doubt. And it seems like you got your Grand Canyon, you've got these massive canyons in the United States, right, where there was obviously much more going on as far as civilization than we are told, especially with going back into those old maps. You have Chicago known as Chilaga. These were known as gold cities, right? I go down here to Iowa to the State House, and it's got a gold dome on the top of this massive structure. So it's not hard to imagine that these would have been everywhere. These very much would have been cities of gold to your average person.
Yeah, not just a myth, but a real city of gold.
Yeah, exactly. And then if you have an electrical device, or laser, electrical, directed energy kind of thing going on, and it's strong enough to uproot that much dirt, even if it was just one canyon like Bryce Canyon, that's a significant amount of debris that's then put into the air.
Exactly.
And it's got to fall somewhere. And if we have these rotating air currents going around the world, they're going to carry that dust everywhere. And then as soon as it rains, boom, you have an instant mud flood.
You got it. So without getting too much into mud flood, we do have the burial mounds of America. These are allegedly purposeful burial mounds that the Native Americans built for themselves across the country. Smithsonian Museum has destroyed almost all of these mounds in the 20th century, and there's only a few left. The Serpent Mound,
right?
That's a famous one. But the question is, what are these mounds? Are they really small humans buried purposefully? No, humans don't do that. In fact, Native Americans didn't bury people at all. They incinerated people. The Bruce Horde Empire is all about incineration. They knew that burial was sort of a dangerous and risky tradition to do. You shouldn't bury people. Actually, they figured this out a long time ago in Siberia, that aside from being eaten by maggots and stuff, It's not a pleasant experience and spread disease back to the people around. They figured out in old Rus Horde Empire a long time ago that if you're gonna bury somebody, they have to be important. And you got to bury them in an important place that allows for that, and that is Egypt. That's why so many tombs in Egypt. All the czars crossed the Mediterranean, the river Styx, and were entombed in Egypt in a place where the sand is so dry that their bodies, the fluids from their bodies dry away, no maggots. It's a nice, peaceful place to rest. Anywhere else on Earth, pretty much, you don't have that kind of peace. So Native Americans in their empire knew that, did not bury people, and these burial mounds are something else. This picture shows that the idea that this was a systemic, strategic burial mound of small people buried layer after layer. But another burial mound photo shows that some of these mounds were not done with any organization at all. In fact, you see the person buried with their tools. And they're like, why are they buried with their tools? Oh, they're bringing them to the afterlife. No, that's not why. They're just buried with their tools all at once. And they're buried with their livestock as well. So how could that be? There wouldn't have been a ceremony, it wouldn't have been a death ceremony. This would have been all at once. They immediately got buried all at once in a single event and got covered and stuck in this sort of pattern. Later on, they were finding all these burial mounds and digging them up. The Smithsonian Museum really, it looks like they covered all this up. So there's no reason for anyone to be trusting them that they found the mounds intact like this photo shows, because they destroyed them all. They're the culprits who destroyed them. You see the photos, see as a bunch of black slaves here working anyway.
And then supposedly reappropriated all of the remains back to the Native American groups.
Right.
Which doesn't make sense. When you speak to a Native American, they will tell you about this war with these giant people that apparently built these mounds.
Yep.
And them having it out for hundreds of years. So why would we give the remains back to this other culture of their enemy?
That's a great point.
So it's kind of mind blowing.
Right. So like I said, the Book of Mormon actually says also that there were giants here in America and that they're all wiped out by God. So why don't we just look at that testimony as real, not say that the Mormons are crazy anymore? Maybe they're maybe they've been
onto a lot, man.
Yeah, they've been redacted into the deep state religion. Everything's like a fairy tale now, and their text has been changed, no doubt about it. But their Book of Mormon represents the least redacted version of the Bible, the most recent version that we have. And in that version, there was giants in America that came from the collinear configuration, the Tower of Babel, before it fell and settled in America. And when they're all wiped out, the Mormon Book of Mormon says that the survivors, Native American survivors, their skin was red from this event. What kind of event would turn their skin red? Only the kind of event that would be involving heat, right? Tremendous heat from the sky hitting everyone all at once. Do we have any references for this kind of event happening aside from MudFlood? Yes, we do. Tunguska event of 1908 or 1912, depending on which one you believe. Tunguska, very interesting testimony. This event wiped out Siberia. It destroyed entire forests, and the people who survived it said that they felt their skin burning all at once. The sky rips open, splits in half. One side of it turns red. They feel their skin burning, and they start to try to rip their clothes off, look for water, try to jump into there to save themselves. For some reason, nobody died in the Tunguska event, even though they said it was a 12 megaton explosion and so forth. It's probably because the Tunguska event is a redaction. The date was changed. It occurred originally in 1812, and they said it happened in 1912. As a result of that, we have 0 deaths, and all of the deaths were pushed into the past, into the Napoleonic Wars. So how did this happen? How did this MudFlood event happen? How was Napoleon defeated? Like I said, there's humans on Mars. They've been influencing our affairs since the Golden Age. They've always been involved. They speak through the cathedrals and the pyramids. They have very limited influence here because for a long time they weren't able to travel. They only are a couple hundred years ahead of us in technology as a result of being dependent on technology. They have poor resources on Mars, seasonal water, and so forth. So yes, this whole time they've been trying to get resources from Earth, and that requires controlling Earth in some fashion. And when the Napoleonic Wars ruined their plan, they had to do something so drastic to reverse the plan and bring it back to where it is today. And so what I believe they did was they created a giant space laser. And why do I believe that? Because we have a lot of predictive programming that basically implies exactly that. everything from The Simpsons to what was that guy's name? I'm forgetting the early literature now. Simpsons. Let's stick to that one. Have you seen this episode? It's a Halloween special where there's this giant laser that's built and humanity has been enslaved. You ever saw this episode?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Very funny, right? And it's because Kang runs for president and they have to vote for him because of the two-party system and all that. Anyway, they've been giving us this predictive programming in all forms of media, in books, movies, TV, to make us to get the idea through our head so that we reject it. Why are we rejecting it? Because we believe it's fiction. We know that Simpsons is fiction. It's a Hollywood episode, for God's sake, you know. But here we got like a Mega Man comic book, which is talking about not only the mythical continent of Mu, but also the end of the world. Like, why are they bringing these topics up in kids' literature? I played all the Mega Man games, and they have nothing to do with
it. Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
Here's a South Park, and they're you know how they are. They attack everything. So they went after the Mormons and said, "This is what they really believe." Can you believe they believe this?
Yeah, and then it's all dumb.
Yeah,
so they're just
But hey, they're saying, look at this. You know, the Native Americans were white; they weren't redskins originally, and you know, they had this whole advanced empire here in America. They weren't sticks and stones.
They tell the story, but they make it sound like it's so out there to even possibly believe that you'd have to be stupid, you know. Yeah, exactly. And they pull it off. They do.
That's right. They're not even showing anything. They just make us hear it, imagine it. So yeah, predictive programming is a big clue for what they don't want us to believe in or look at. But like I said, the American civilization, like you point out, cities of gold, advanced technology, they still have a lot of the churches today still sticking around. They're all built in this Tatarian architecture, which is known today as Roman architecture, but people are starting to use the word Tatarian because that's really what it is. These structures exist throughout Europe and in Asia and in America, and very few of them actually exist in Italy. They have, like I said, Rome and Florence, but that was not the center. So yeah. So what could have caused the Grand Canyon? The Electric Universe guys point to this primary coronal storm system. This is how electricity discharges in a planet. First, the planet absorbs a lot of electricity from, say, another planet in a configuration or something, and then that energy has to go somewhere. It can't be destroyed or dissipated due to laws of physics. So sorry, laws of thermodynamics, rather.
Right.
That energy has to go somewhere. So it comes out as a secondary discharge. And that secondary discharge comes out from the ground, from inside the planet. Energy passing through the inside of the planet, it's hollow, and then back out through the surface. It hit these regions because these regions were dry, and the sand and the rock was able to get charged up quickly. It wasn't swampy. It didn't have forests or anything like that. So these regions got hit by the secondary electric discharge, and they think it happened in primordial times, and I think it happened in the 1812 war, essentially, because it matches up perfectly with the topography that we see in these regions. They're all pretty much electric scarred. So yeah, that's what we're getting at. Yeah, I got a bunch of predictive programming stuff on here. The Ghostbusters mentions the Tunguska event in 1908, and also in Ghostbusters 2, they mention the end of the world apocalyptic date being February 14th, 2016. They predicted it in the future. And he said, Valentine's Day, bummer. This wasn't a joke. These guys know what the next apocalypse date is because they know what the last one is.
Well, and you know, based on the Ethiopian calendar, which apparently is still intact, you know, after it's not the same as the Gregorian or the Julian calendar.
I didn't hear that. I got you.
And so apparently the year we're in today, this year is 2016. A couple of years ago would have been 2014. Or no, is it 2014 now? It's right around 2014 or 2016 right now. So you might want to look into that. It's very interesting to find out that they do still have an old calendar intact. And they were talking about when you know, this last scamdemic hit, that it was actually the beginning of the year or the end of the year 2012 by the Ethiopian calendar. So that much being said, that's interesting. So we're going through it right now, and what this particular shift is yet quite to be seen.
Right, and I've noticed about a 4-year and 8-year shift in a couple of dates anyway. So I see that this has been going for a while. And I'm a programmer, so everything I think about with numbers or anything like that, I try to think of it in programming terms, causality, and I'm trying to looking at history in that terms, and to me, it makes perfect sense for them to constantly shift the date like that. And a perfect example of that is the London fire of 1666, which occurred on September 6th, and on this date, you basically had the entire city of London burn. It changed their government, and they imposed a usury and so forth afterwards. But before that date, it was predicted as an apocalypse date by many people, not just Christians in the West, but also by rabbis in the East. And while nothing happened in the East, and the rabbis converted to Islam, according to Scalgerian history, in the West, the city of London burned on that date. And the most interesting thing about that date is, if you plug in the phantom time hypothesis to it, the real date was the year 666 on September 6th.
Right.
So now you got an actual reference for them predicting a date based on this number, and then something happens, and that kind of event will convince people, wow, maybe God really does influence us or something like that. So yes, I do see a lot of evidence of date shifting, the power of date shifting there.
Absolutely, man. That's wild. So do you think that at some point along that energy like meridian that they introduced a significant charge, or that this came from like off planet?
It definitely has to have been from off planet, because like I said, it wasn't an advanced technology age. It was the dawn of technology, advanced technology. Everything that was being built was done in a simple fashion. A lot of things were nuclear powered because nuclear fuel was easy to generate into electricity. Also, people knew that nuclear fuel was safe and healthy. Actually, it's good for you. There's no reason to ban it. There's no reason for microchips. There's no reason for wires. All the technology was simple. So when it comes to building a laser capable of destroying regions on another planet, they didn't have satellites yet. They didn't have remote control or anything like that. They had to do it themselves with their own hands, the biggest scale they could possibly do. And the way that this works is that we're not as far from Mars as we think we are. During opposition, we're at the closest juncture to Mars. This happens every 36 months, actually. And the 36-month period correlates with a lot of weird activity on Earth. The stock market, for example, always jumps when we're in opposition with Mars, always, as if they're trading on Earth, which they most likely are. But most importantly, during the opposition, the electromagnetic fields of both planets bump up against each other. And that means that you can pass energy between them. So you're not shooting across the space, you're shooting between touching fields. It's very, there's nowhere else for the energy to go. The energy is going to flow to the Earth, it's going to strike the ground. It's just a matter of positive and negative. So all they had to do was build one of those devices of the biggest, largest scale that they possibly could do. There was the reason why I believe that they did this in anticipation of the Napoleonic Wars is because of the Napoleon comet, which was seen in 1811. You can look it up. And this comet was seen during the wars, and everyone said it was a harbinger of his defeat. But other people say that Napoleonic comet was what defeated Napoleon. This comet showed up and defeated him, just destroyed his entire army. And they say the exact same thing about this chief in America. This comet is named after him too, but in America. And they say that it wiped out his entire American tribe. So you can look up the comets, and they happened in 1811.
Right.
So it's right up against that war right there. So I think that they had the gun ready. They saw this stuff happening on Earth, and they basically didn't want to use it until they absolutely had to. And they knew that this could fall apart on them because they're the ones that created it. They knew how fragile this deep state religion is, this monotheism. Honestly, one of these days, we're going to snap out of it. Our whole planet's going to snap out of it because it's just not, it's not who we are. It's not who we were. It doesn't represent our religions very well, or our regions. Like, it doesn't represent Christianity or Judaism or Islam or any of those things. Have nothing to do with monotheism, period. And eventually we're going to disconnect that one belief. And when we do that, we're going to have dislodged ourselves from control of the deep state as it exists. And until we do that, we'll never really fully be in charge, free of them. Because as long as we still believe that, it's time to go to church and listen to what, the priest says God is saying, then they will always be able to speak for God, and they will always be able to create pandemics and warfare and force everyone to just go pray and hope for good luck, essentially. So,
right. Yeah, no doubt, man.
This whole time.
No doubt, for sure. Man, and that's one thing that I think most people can agree on is the manipulation factor of the religious complex. And it doesn't matter what, your particular faith is.
No.
If you are engaging with these systems, you're the one losing out. And it doesn't matter if it's, the financial system, if it's the religious system, if it's the educational system. If you're engaging with these systems that are all built by the same group of people, you're gonna lose. It doesn't matter. Maybe you get a degree out of it though, right? Maybe um you get a white collar to slip under your black shirt. You get these little perks, these very material perks out of something that's supposed to be more divinely centered, like
But
yeah, it's mind blowing.
What they'll never give you is a path into their system. You'll never become a celebrity, a movie star, a politician, a preacher, not one that matters, like the
right
Pope level
unless
preacher.
you buy in.
Those guys are all nepotistic. They're families. You have to be part of their family, and that families never betray themselves. That's why I believe the deep state is a natural human thing. It's just families that would rather see everyone else go down, so that they don't have to face the crimes that their family has done in the past. It's a very innocent concept, and the people
certainly while continuing to engage in criminal activity, and so
they don't see themselves as criminals at all. I know how families like this operate, because I have an Israeli family, and they are all about protecting the tribe.
Right.
Truth and suppress technology and money, all those things. They believe that they can claim those things that don't belong to anyone else but them. So it's kind of hard to deal with, mentality like that. For sure.
Yeah, it's hard, and it's hard to have hope and aspirations for the future when your world is run by absolute maniacs. Kind of like Charlton Heston said, those maniacs, they blew it all up. They blew it all to hell. Right. So they have told us exactly what has gone on through so many different avenues that it's just confusing, but what you can count on is that one avenue that you're so used to tuning into is not the real shit. Right. You're not finding anything worthwhile by watching CNN or anywhere on TV. And most often you're not going to find anything worthwhile in historic text type format. You're just not. Anything that's been translated into English or is of English Latin origin has no past to it. It has, what I mean? It's lost in translation, all of it, and it's on purpose. All of this language division is on purpose. That way none of us can understand each other enough through our disillusion in different religion, being divisively divided. There we go.
Right.
None of us will take the time, and it starts with like a simple conversation like you and I are having, but you got to have an open mind, and we're not taught to have open minds about anything right now, except for apparently gender role. I think that's the only thing we're supposed to have an open mind about, is what somebody's gender identity is. Other than that, we need to stick to our own guns, apparently, and hold it down for our religion or our subsect of the man's cause. So, hopefully there's more people out there kind of coming to and waking up and deciding to take their lives back for themselves, and quit doing the self-destructive behavior that Hollywood preaches. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it's happening.
For sure. I like to think so, and it definitely seems to in my immediate kind of sphere of influence. So I'm thankful for that. And dude, I'm so thankful for you coming on, man, and breaking it down for us all.
Yeah.
And there's so much there. It's so much fun to talk about all of it. But it does to a certain degree can be kind of frightening for people and make you not want to open your eyes when you see that there's a string being pulled that possibly changed the face of the earth a couple of 100 years ago. That's right. That's a pretty daunting thing to want to stand up against. And so I appreciate you being out there and getting that info out, and for coming on, man. It's been an amazing ride. Thank you so much. It's been a lot of fun.
Yeah, it's been a lot of fun.
Absolutely, dude. Anytime. Have a good one. We'll see you next time.
All right, I'll see you around later.
Awesome. I appreciate